Very good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. Today we have with us Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Chairperson, 𝐿 India Foundation. Although Dr. Rajiv doesn't require any introduction because of his experiences and the accolades that he has achieved during his lifetime. But let me briefly introduce Dr. Rajiv. So Dr. Rajiv, a distinguished Indian economist, he has served as at many positions, and including the vice chairman of NITI Aayog from 2017 to 2022. So we welcome Dr. Rajiv today for this featured speakers webinar. And before we hand over to Dr. Rajiv, so I would like to invite our Dean Bambang Brojonegoro for welcoming Dr. Rajiv for his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachita. Very good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending wherever you are, for all distinguished guests and participants. I am Bambang Brojonegoro, Dean and CEO of Asian Development Bank Institute. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the ADBI Featured Speaker Webinar event today. The Featured Speaker Webinar is a regular event in which ADBI invites high-level, experienced speakers from academia, international organizations, and governments to highlight their works or activities, exchange ideas, and help participants gain a better understanding of the frontier of development issues. Today's topic comes at the right time, as the world is going through a transitional phase marked by technological advancement, digitalization, climate change, geopolitical tension, and the push for sustainable development. All this can be overwhelming and create great uncertainty for policymakers trying to address the issue. We have a very distinguished speaker who will help us make sense of development changes that are happening all at once and navigate today's rapidly changing society. It is my great pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Chairperson of 𝐿 India Foundation and former Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog. Dr. Kumar's experiences cover academia, government, corporate bodies, and multilateral institutions. This breadth of experience, together with his strong scholarly background and extensive publication, provides him with a distinctive and well-rounded perspective on global development. His talk today on Everything All at Once, India and the Sixth Simultaneous Global Transition will highlight some of the major changes currently impacting the world, namely geopolitical, geographical, geoeconomic, the rise of the Global South, climate change, and technological advancement, and give his perspective on how it will impact India and propose a vision for India's future. Once again, on behalf of ADBI, I would like to express our utmost gratitude to the speaker, Professor 𝐘𝐃 Otsuka, for joining us as a discussion, and all participants joining us online from all over the globe today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Bambang. Now I would like to invite Dr. Rajiv to deliver his talk.
Dean Bambang Brojonegoro, Professor 𝐘𝐃 Otsuka, my friend Dil Bahadur Raut, who's there, I suppose, Rachita, and all the eminent guests and audiences who are here. A very good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you all. It's indeed a privilege to speak in this featured webinar series of the ADBI, an institute I was closely associated with when I used to be working in the Asian Development Bank, Manila, especially in the research department of the ADB, and had many occasions to visit the ADBI. So again, once more, a pleasure and a privilege to be speaking here. Friends, we are all conscious of the turbulent times that we are living in today. And, Professor Fukuyama's announcement that history had ended in 1991 seems now quite premature, actually. And therefore, this turbulence surrounds us. And about 2 years ago, when my co-author Ishan Joshi and I started working on this book, we realized that this turbulence was actually almost all encompassing across many dimensions of our lives. And therefore, and we could discern at that time six transitions globally going on simultaneously at the same time in our world today. Not just one or two, but very often we've seen those, but six. And let me just recount them for you. One was what we saw as the beginning of the decline of Pax Americana. Second was the inexorable rise of Asia. The third was the geo-economic transition, which had made many post-war, institutions, whether it's the WTO or the UN agencies, almost irrelevant in our given situation. The fourth was, the shift from OECD to the global south. The fact that today the seven largest emerging economies have a greater share in PPP terms in the global economy than the G7 countries. So that was the fourth. The fifth was the huge technological transition that we are going through now. The artificial intelligence, the post-internet world, the question of singularity, etc. And lo and behold, we have the sixth one, which we have now been with us for at least 30 years, but we don't recognize it, is the climate change, where we now realize that the window is very short and it might be closing in 20 years. So these six massive changes, transitions going on in the world is for when we started writing this, it seemed like an esoteric exercise. Oh, well, whether it's not or true. But I must confess that the second coming of President Donald Trump has put these six transitions right in the middle and center of the global attention. So therefore, to that extent, this book has become much more relevant than we thought it would be. Now, suddenly we know that neither has history come to an end, as Professor Fukuyama said, and nor is the world flat any longer, as Thomas Friedman had said. So and therefore, we in the emerging economies, have to learn to navigate in choppy waters, have to learn to navigate our world, our growth, our development in very choppy waters, and with hardly any lessons or anchors from the past, because all of that has changed, it seems. And in the book, we point out that the bottom line, Professor Otsuka, is that business as usual will not do for anybody, whether it is the independent countries, or it is the multilateral institutions, or it is the corporate world. Business as usual will not do. We need new approaches to development. And taking just one example, so far we have always believed that we can grow now and retrofit for the environment later, that we can fix the environment later. The mercury in the Tokyo Bay, or the drying up of the Aral Sea, or the complete toxification of the river Thames, or in China, whatever has happened. The idea was grow now and retrofit later. But this choice is not open to countries like India any longer. If we do that, and as I'll explain later, we will be breaching the planetary boundary conditions. And to that extent, we will have a catastrophe on our hands. So therefore, we have to think differently, and we have to start planning for new paradigms of development. And this is what the book is about. So I feel very confident that an institute like ADBI, can can even lead to this intellectual churning, this global intellectual churning that we require today to figure out as to how we navigate the world going forward in the 21st century, when all these six transitions will come to our head and will come and affect us in so many ways. Let me just briefly touch upon each one of those six, given the paucity of times, and then we'll go into the question and answer. We can go in detail later. Pax Americana. It was an inexorable rise of America from 1947 to 1991. Just went on. There was a NATO, CETO, CENTO, so many alliances. America In fact, Americans ruled the world. And in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, then there emerged the unipolar world, which remained there for almost 20 years. And that is the time when we all thought that there was no other contestation to the US. But then what happened? After that, what you got is, the Second Gulf War, which ended in a bit of a stalemate because Americans withdrew from Iraq. That was then the Arab Spring, where America took it upon itself to introduce democracy in the Islamic world. And we will all agree that whether it was in Libya, Tunisia, elsewhere, Syria, it didn't succeed. There was a Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008, which went unchecked. The Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014, and China's creation of artificial islands in the South China Sea, again in 2014, also went unchecked. And that to us marked the beginning of the decline of Pax Americana. Rather than the unipolar world, there was now a multipolar world, it seemed. There was a contested hegemony that you had, in the world. And I think the withdrawal from Kabul in 2021 signified, the US withdrawal signified a major change in the world geopolitics. And that's what we say is that, and I think what Mr. President Trump is doing today will hasten this decline of Pax Americana, whereby the world was used to being run by the American rules and orders, and they were the guarantors of stability and the multilateral trading order in the world. I think that's changed. We believe, and we write in this book that that this has changed now irrevocably, and we'll see, and the implications of that should be studied very closely. The second, and in fact, we are now today in a world which is seeing US-China rivalry. Russia has also become active, but let us note that the US-China rivalry will not be a Cold War 2.0. It will not be like the Soviet Union versus the West, no, because there is this huge integration in economic terms between China and the US, and we are seeing this being played out on a daily basis. The third, and therefore we will not see a military solution to this. And it could be a messy duopoly, it could be multipolarity, it could actually mean greater space for intermediate powers like India, Japan, Turkey, and others, and Brazil, and BRICS, and so on. We should discuss that. The second transition is the rise of Asia. Between 1750 to 1950, to 1950, India's between up to 1750, in the share of India and China, according to Angus Madison, up to 1750 was 57% of the world economy. 57% of the world economy, and that is Angus Madison. And that came down by 1950 to about 8% of what had happened during the colonial domination of both these countries, opium wars on the one hand, extreme extraction of surplus from India, etc., and they went down. But then it's now beginning to change again. And what you see today is that China, in PPP terms, has a larger share, I think, of 19% of the world economy than even the US. And India's share in PPP term is about 12%. So they are together again 31%. And if you add to it Japan and Korea and Taiwan and Indonesia, the writing is clear on the wall that 200-year blip that was there between 1750 to 1950, where the transatlantic region rose to domination, is now ending. And Asia is now reoccupying its position that it had done traditionally over the millennia until 1750. So that's the second big transition, and I think this requires a very big change in our own mindset and the way we look at the world and the way we create our alliances and the strategic autonomies, etc. I think that's the second one. Now the third transition that we're talking about is, the rise of the global South. And if you add, I talked about Asia already, and if you add Asia, Africa, and Latin America to the South, I think you will notice that today the real growth is, the dynamism is in this region, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And here is the opportunity, the big opportunity we point out, saying that if major countries, this is the time for these countries to come together, form what is called the coalition of the willing, if we like, because we need new global order which will arise from the old, and we need some agencies to work on that. It will not happen on its own, and therefore we need some active agencies to be doing this as we go forward. Now, and the fourth one is the geo-economic transition. And I mentioned this slightly earlier, which is that in PPP terms, the share of G7 countries, which today are seen as the biggest, formulation, etc., and which also constitute the Security Council of the UN and so on. The share of those countries is less than the 7 largest emerging economies of the world. And therefore, what has happened is that those institutions, that were created in the post-war era, whether it is the UN agencies, the ESCAP and the ECLA and the UN the Economic Council or the WTO, they are becoming almost irrelevant. They need to be restructured. Their membership has to be redefined. And unless you do that, I think, and this is the meaning of the geo-economic transition. In our book, we point out that in China is now, according to the Institute of Strategic Studies, Australia, out of the 44 critical technologies, China is leading in 39 of them. And then the 14th plenum, which was just over, has again called for even a bigger push to the higher technologies. The announcements of quantum computing, of material science, of battery technology, and the coming for announcement of the 15th five-year plan of China in March will show further that the geo-economic transition is well on its way. Now, it will not happen all automatically. The US is still by far the largest economy in the world. Its R&D, science and technology establishments are robust. So it will not be, as it were, just go away. But nonetheless, what we need to do is to reconsider what we have so far believed to be the only game in town, which is the post-war institutions that are there. Now, again, and also in this case, I mean, not just China, but look at India. India's digital public infrastructure that we have created is now attracting attention across the world. Our unified payment infrastructure that we've got, the UPI, which is digital money, today, and it has 20 billion transactions every month, and that is handled, just seamlessly across the whole country. We've got the India stack, the health stack, 1.2 billion people with biometric identities and growing. All of this means that things are happening not just in the US or Europe, but in Asia and the geo-economic, and these are reflections of the geo-economic transition that we have, that we're going on. The fifth, friends, ladies and gentlemen, is the technological revolution, but which is, in our view, and in our book we write that this is the sixth most transformative revolution that is happening in the world history. The first, if you remember, was steam, then came electricity, then came mass manufacturing, then came the internal combustion engine, then the internet or the World Wide Web, and now we have artificial intelligence. And the prospects are that in the next 5 years, machine intelligence could be higher than human intelligence. We now are talking openly about singularity, where humans and machines will interact almost as equals. And we today need a very powerful message for global frameworks to regulate the AI and to ensure, just like we did in the case of cloning, after the first mammal was cloned, Dolly was cloned, we now need a similar push for making sure that AI doesn't become, as it were, doesn't go above the human consciousness and become sentient. So that's one part of the AI. But the second part of the AI is, as we are trying to do in India, is to use it, to harness it for improving our human development indicators in education and health and environment, for the emerging economies. And that can be done, and that can be done not in a sort of linear manner, but in an exponential manner if we use the AI properly. And we have to come together to understand. I remember once when I was in Niti Aayog, we were talking with 𝐿𝐵 in Japan, and they have an institute near Osaka on artificial intelligence and data, how India and Japan could collaborate with data and technology so that the two can come together. Things like that will need to happen. And the last one, friends, is climate change. I was very disappointed with COP30. For 30 years, we have been doing and nothing is coming out of it. We are not recognizing that we have a very short window left for preventing this massive global public good disaster that is facing us now at this time. In India's case, we have this, and we in emerging economies probably rightly, of course, ask for historical fairness, that the developed economies did all that in the past, now they should pay for it. Now, it's not our duty, and we will grow and retrofit later. That option is just not available to us. I give you one example. There is something called the Asian brown cloud, which is about the carbon rising into the atmosphere and then descending on the snow peaks of the Himalayas, which is called the third pole in the world. That carbon on the snow peaks means that those snow peaks retain more heat now than they used to do earlier, and therefore the glaciers are melting. It is now documented that our glaciers, Himalayan glaciers, are receding at 5 meters a year at this time, and there have been several catastrophes in the Indian Himalayas where glacial lakes have been formed and then they burst their dams, where glaciers have gone back miles and miles away. And if that happens, the perennial rivers which feed India and China, they will see a massive disruption in their, and that's happening. And then think about our coastline, India's coastline, or the island economies. And it was not for nothing that one meeting was held in Maldives underwater. If sea levels were to rise by a few inches, India will see the largest environment refugees from its neighboring countries. This is now happening. This is now imminent, as it were. So therefore, this climate change, the transition has to be taken far more seriously than what we do today. I have with my own eyes seen the fact that Amu Darya, the mighty Amu Darya, which doesn't reach the Aral Sea, and therefore the southern half of the Aral Sea has completely dried up, and therefore causes massive diseases in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, etc. So that is what's happening. So now in this case, in climate change, what is the view that we have taken in our book? We have taken the view that adaptation and mitigation are not going to be enough. Yes, we had a time, we have to do those along with. But at the same time, what we really need to do is to find technologies and ways and means to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere. To reduce the carbon, we have to undertake carbon sequestration. And that is the way to do it, to put the carbon back in the soil. At least in India, we know, and I'm sure it is true of other countries as well, that our soil, the carbon content in the soil has depleted tremendously over the last 50, 60 years because of the use of chemical fertilizers. Our statistics are, there's an Institute of Soil Sciences in India, which said that in our case, the carbon content of our soil in India was 2.5% in 1947. 1.5% is required to keep the soil arable. Today, our national average is 0.3%. And therefore what we have to do is to have increasing dosage of chemical fertilizers with declining marginal returns in terms of grain output. Plus, when you have chemical fertilizers, you need much more groundwater to dissolve it within the soil. And once you have that groundwater, in many emerging countries, economies, and like India and China, are already water stressed. We have a very small percentage of fresh water compared to our populations. And if this excessive use of groundwater continues, then we will actually face that problem very sharply. So therefore, what we need is some development, some technology to get the carbon back into the soil. Many things are being tried out across the world at the moment for this. But one of the experiments that we are trying out in India, and the Honorable Prime Minister made a big support proclamation for it just last Friday to find scientific evidence for it, is zero chemical farming, is natural farming. Something that Professor Fukuoka talked about in the case of Japan long ago, and he talked about lack of no tilling, etc., etc. And in our case, and this zero chemical farming, now we have evidence from agriculture universities, and the Pehle India Foundation is doing a 3-year project, 3-year lighthouse project to try and collect more scientific evidence on the use of groundwater, on the increase in carbon content in the soil, on the improvement quality of the products so that you don't get consumers' health being destroyed, etc., all of those. And there is now clear evidence, that the carbon content of the soil increases with the expansion of zero chemical farming as you can go. So what we need to do is to really scale it up globally. Because if we do that, then we are sure that we will have a carbon sequestration program, which is the need of the hour. And then we have to combine this with digital technologies, like Israel has done, to make sure that you optimize the use of groundwater, that you optimize the use of herbal pesticides and herbal fertilizers. So the combination of zero chemical farming and digital technologies can give us a completely new paradigm of agricultural development, a new paradigm which will ensure food security, nourishment security, ecological security, and the fact that our farmers' incomes will also improve at the same time, which is not happening so far in many emerging economies. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the 6 transitions that we have talked about and in our book. And what we say is that because they're taking place simultaneously, we all need to come together to try and do this. And therefore, towards the end, in the sort of last chapter of our book, we suggest an 8-fold path for 8-fold recommendation, which are largely tuned for India, but I dare say they have a much larger, much wider implication as well. And let me begin with what is internationally required. And in our view, what is internationally required is building a coalition of the willing among the global south, for those who would want to come together to create this intellectual churning for all of us for all of us to realize what we need to do to address these challenges. Because as I said earlier, the past will not be a guide to our future. We have to create, we have to design our future ourselves, and therefore I think it is time for the coalition of the global south to take up these challenges together. The second that we thought about is that each of us, each emerging economy, will have to have a strategic autonomy in its foreign policy. There is no more place for being pro this and pro that. We will have to have what is sometimes called horses for courses, but we have to design our foreign policy in a manner that we can come together with different parts of our multipolar world to create the solutions for the future. In the India's case, we have very clear 4 some recommendations. One, which is that we have to build our social capital. We have to build, reconstruct, rejuvenate our social capital so that it is not divided on any lines. Whether in whether social, caste, communal, whatever. So you have to bring them together as far as possible, because that is what will hold. That is what will give the kind of environment which investors would want to. The second one that we have done is that we need a new design for private-public partnership. I'm not calling it public-private partnership, but private-public partnership, because like in many countries, like in Japan, for example, or to an extent in China, in the US, the government has to become a supporter of private enterprise. We have to have a promotional government rather than a regulatory government, which is what we have in India. And our Prime Minister has called for removal of the regulatory and compliance burden. So that's the big thing there. The third is a complete governance transformation. We have to transform our governance mechanism so that there is no more a ruler and the ruled kind of division. It's not top down. And we in Pele India are doing a rather ambitious project on how to make our districts the fulcrum of development, and how to design a development model based on our districts, which are each 3 million strong in any case. The fourth one is, of course, a focus on employment. I think it's time, it's passé. We should maybe just give up using GDP as a measure of progress or growth, etc. In any case, it hides a lot because it's a national average. We give an alternate in our book called the Gross Welfare Product, which takes into account the decline in natural capital along with the growth of economic to be actually understand properly. But here we say that now developing economies have to focus very sharply on employment generation, because AI will make it difficult as we go forward. And then finally, of course, we say that we have to now think very consciously of how to harness AI so that it doesn't become a challenge, but becomes a tool, becomes an instrument for improving productivity, improving skills, and for actually improving the living standards of our people all over the world. So those are our 8 recommendations that we make. I repeat that of these, 2 are for, as it were, the sort of global community, building the coalition of the willing, and having strategic autonomy in our foreign policy design. The others, which are focused on India, I dare say may have some relevance, some resonance also in other emerging economies, because they face similar challenges. That's the book, sir, Everything All at Once. And as I said, we started this 2 years ago, and I'm really grateful to the ADBI for giving me this opportunity to present it to an international audience. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. So for sharing your views on the Everything All at Once, and discussing the 6 simultaneous global transitions that are happening. So geopolitical, geographical, geoeconomic, economic power transitions, technological, and climate change transitions. So it is very insightful to hear from you. So now I would like to invite Professor Otsuka, who has joined us to share some reflections on the talk delivered by you. Professor Otsuka is a visiting fellow of ADBI and is distinguished honorary professor at Kobe University. So I invite Professor Otsuka to share his views.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be a discussant on this very, very important book. And I quickly read the book in a short period of time, so I might have misunderstood some points. The presentation today is very clear, and so I think I now have a proper understanding of what the book is all about. Can I go to the next page? Yeah, I like the author's idea of of categorizing the major transitions into 6 categories: geopolitical, geographical, geoeconomic, economic power transition, technological transition, and then climate change. So first one, geopolitical transition, is related with reducing or declining Pax Americana and rising China-US rivalry. And second one, geographical transition, is related to the rapid development of China and the recent development of India. Geo-economic transition, which consists of main things, but one of the most important things is the protectionism, increasing protectionism of the international trade. And fourth one is economic power transition. The relative income positions of OECD countries has been declining compared with the global south, as Rajiv emphasized properly. And then number 5, AI-led revolution. I'm not so familiar with this issue, but I'm more interested in the 6th issue, that is carbon transition or climate change. These 6 transitions are all important, but they are not really independent, actually interrelated. And also they are related with the policies of the US or Trump's policies or Xi Jinping's policy in China. In fact, President Trump's policies are major causes for declining Pax Americana and increasing protectionism and decreasing enthusiasm about climate change. Good news is that increasing number of Americans now realize that Trump's policies are not quite correct, and that MAGA, Make America Great Again, will never be realized under Trump's administration. And then China's rapid growth for the last few decades, since 1978, when economic reform began, led to surprising growth of China that led to US-China rivalry, and also shift of center of gravity to Indo-Pacific, including Asia. And then protectionism is also related with the rapid growth of China, and also the rise of global South. So the important issues are what will be happening in the United States and also China. So although the book did not mention so much about the future of US economy and future of Chinese economy, I'd like to touch upon these issues briefly in the next slides. Can I go to the next slide? Yeah, it is well known among economists that the engine of economic growth is innovation, either in developed or developing economies. We economists used to use the term technological progress or technological change, but now economists have realized that not only technology, but also management are very important. Therefore, I use the term innovation rather than technological change. And then innovation is supported by strong university education and also investment in frontier science. President Trump is cutting down throat by weakening strong education and research system in the US, which is a real asset of the United States. If this policy continues, US is likely to be mediocre developed country at best. It cannot sustain its economic power if education and science policy is in bad shape. And to the best of my knowledge, no country has ever succeeded in industrialization by imposing a protective tariff. Trump's tariffification policy would not stimulate development of American economy at all. So although this book does not discuss these issues, I believe that the future of the US economy will be very gloomy, and it will undoubtedly lose economic, political, and scientific leaderships in the world under the Trump administration. Now I'd like to take a look at the experience of development of Asian countries, including China, Japan. This graph shows GDP changes in GDP per capita in the US and selected countries in Asia. The numbers are PPP, purchasing power parity adjusted. Therefore, we can directly compare the income levels or GDP levels. And I use a semi-log scale. So you must be a bit careful about it. In East Asian so-called miracle countries, including Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea, like Japan, it began growing around 1950, and then the growth rate accelerated. In the 1960s, Japan grew annually at the rate of 10% per year. And then after 1970s, the growth rate slowed down. The similar thing happened in Hong Kong, Singapore, the so-called four tiger countries. High growth period was followed by slow growth period, suggesting that the low-income economy can grow very fast by learning technology and management from advanced countries like the United States. In China is shown by the blue curve. It grew pretty fast since 1978 when economic reform began. And it grew at the rate of 10% for quite some time, for a few decades. But it's important to realize that its growth rate has slowed down. Slowed down at the income level where other East Asian miracle countries were growing very fast at the rate of 10% per year. So when the income was a bit above $5,000 per capita, GDP per capita was a bit greater than 5,000, the 5 countries in East Asia, Japan and four tigers, grew at the rate of 10%. But China's growth rate slowed down at that income level. And also, although the Chinese government announced that the Chinese economy grew at the rate of 5%, nobody believed that. All the China experts in the US do not believe that. Not 5%, probably 2% or 1%. I was invited by Peking University last month. Even professors in Peking University argued that 5% was too much. It's not correct. The growth rate has been much slower. So obviously, China's economic policy went wrong, foreshadowing its gloomy future. Indeed, market mechanisms are less utilized, and the economic system is more socialized than before. So I don't think China will continue to grow at the rate of more than 5% for many years. And this is a bit different. This is a kind of footnote, but it's interesting to see that for the last few decades, growth rate of China and India were very similar, at the rate of a little bit less than 10%. Even though, however, even in the recent years, GDP per capita in China is twice as high as GDP per capita in India. So still, China is far richer than India. Okay, next page. Yeah, next page. And then the Professor Kumar and his colleague argued on page 17 that it's very important that the social and economic system will prove capable of outperforming the other country in raising the welfare levels of its population in relation to the comparison between the US and China. It seems to me, it is very clear to me that so long as Xi Jinping, Chinese government maintains very socialistic, distorted policy, China will be outperformed by the US for coming decades. But I think it was interesting for me to observe that on page 13, the authors argue that China's overt goal now is to overtake the US as a leading science and technology player in the world. There are a lot of indications, like number of patents received by Chinese, and the number of articles published in international journals by Chinese, etc., etc. And also, it is true that the Chinese government generously allocates huge budgets to leading universities for research and employment of competent researchers. I was invited by Peking University, and I stayed in the 5-star hotel. And every day we had, for 3-day conference, every day we had a very nice dinner. And when we completed the conference, surprisingly, I received $1,000. I did not expect to receive any money, but I received $1,000. That indicates $1,000 is not important. But what is important is the fact that the professors in Peking University can control a lot of money for research. And that is a strong indication that China may outperform the US in science and technology in the longer run. If that happens, China's income would become very close to income in the United States. Next page. So, in the face of declining relative importance of the US and China, I predict that US and China will not continue to grow at a high rate. So in the face of declining relative importance of the US and China, I believe that India's role as a new world leader is expected to increase. And Professor Rajiv mentioned that it's a good idea for India and Japan to collaborate. That's very nice, but I don't see it in the book, but that's a great idea. But I felt a little bit disappointing to read that the objective of the Indian policy response would be to try and shape the transition to its benefit. Of course, to its benefit is important, but to be a leader in the world, India, I wish we consider not only the India's own benefit, but also benefits of the world as a whole. And then I fully agree with the author's argument that India needs to develop an economic strategy and strengthen its linkage within the Indo-Pacific region. However, there are no discussions of why India's economy has been growing fast in the last few decades. And what strategy should be adopted, exactly, specifically, what strategy should be adopted to sustain its development? And a major question is whether India will continue to grow in coming years. Okay. Carbon transition. I'm interested in climate change, and then authors clearly recognize that global climate is a global public good. That is excellent. I agree. But if global climate is a public good, then issue ought to be how to prevent free riding. Free riding is a major problem. G30 failed to reach, political agreement. That is because of the free riding behaviors of various countries, including the United States. So I was a bit disappointed the fact that no mention is made of free riding, even though it is precisely the central issue. Rajiv mentioned that the developing countries may work together, but I don't think that is a realistic recommendation because the free riding behavior remains to work. And then the author said we have to seriously ponder whether the global community today needs an international energy regulator. Of course, yes, but we have to take action now, not pondering. Taking action is very important. And for me, the real issue is how to reach global agreements on energy use or greenhouse gas emission, monitor them, and punish the violation so as to prevent free riding. That's a fundamental issue which has been bypassed by the book. And next page. I enjoyed reading the book very much, but I also found a little bit difficult to grasp the essence of today's presentation was much clearer, so I have now clearer ideas. First of all, being an economist using econometrics every day, I was a bit surprised that there are almost no statistical table. There are only two tables and one figure. But table one is descriptive table, no number. And then figure is labeled as table, and no caption is provided. So what is shown on page 153 is not known. So I wish to see more quantitative analysis, even if that is descriptive. And this may be my own taste, but when I teach to a student, I strongly argue that each chapter must have conclusion. And unfortunately, each chapter has no concluding section in this book. So after reading the one chapter, whole chapter, I want to summarize what was written. I could, but it's much clearer if the authors summarize major points clearly. And third difficult point is there are a lot of goals, but there are very few discussions, little discussions about strategy. Authors argue that India should achieve OECD comparable human development indicator level. Yes, that's excellent, but how can we do it? And then Rajiv today also mentioned we should build social capital. Yes, we'd like to, but how can we build a social capital? Obviously, Japan has a rich social capital, but the stock of social capital seems to be declining. We want to rebuild social capital, but nobody knows how to build social capital. Focus on employment. Yes, income inequality in India is quite high. Also, in the age of AI, artificial intelligence, the employment will become a serious issue. A lot of people would lose employment because of the introduction of AI. So focus on employment is good, but the question is how can we create employment? That is not discussed in the book. Can we go to the next page? Next page, please. Yeah, quadruple the per capita income level of India's lowest deciles. That's again good, but how can we raise income levels of the poorest people in China? We need concrete, clear strategies. That is missing. And then today, and also in the book, the discussion about organic farming. Organic farming is a potent tool for carbon removal from the environment. I work for International Rice Research Institute and other agricultural research centers, but I definitely do not think that organic farming will provide food security and nutrition security. For food and nutrition security, we still need inorganic fertilizer. That is a common opinion of agriculture scientists. And for removal of carbon from the environment, we need other ways to solve the problem. And then the authors argue that India should find its own model of development that combines growth with lower emission and focus on providing equitable living conditions for its population. I agree, but again, it's not clear to me what should be done. And then I'm worried about India because, can we see the next page? This graph shows long-term changes in GDP share of the manufacturing industries in selected countries. Manufacturing industry is important in providing ample employment opportunity for the poor. Agriculture is very important. Agriculture development is very important for food security. But unfortunately, agriculture has limited capacity to provide employment opportunities. Even during Green Revolution, the employment or labor use per hectare increased only by 30% or so. After tractorization occurred, that gain in employment was wiped away. For the service sector, the modern service sector provides jobs only for educated, already rich people. So development of the modern service sector is good for the economy, but when we look at the income distribution, the development of service sector will not help the poor population. If we look at this figure, China performed so manufacture, for me, for poverty reduction, development of manufacturing industry is fundamental. China performed well in this respect. As you can see, GDP share of manufacturing sector in China has been highest among selected countries. The share was low in the US. It's natural, the share of the GDP, manufacturing GDP tends to decline as a country becomes a very wealthy country. So Japan is also losing a share of manufacturing sector. And then China, India's performance is horribly bad. Only 15%. It's a light blue curve. Only 15%, and it has been almost constant. And for the last several years, it began declining. Unless India has a clear and effective policy to facilitate development of manufacturing industry, the poor people will not become significantly made better off. In contrast, India's neighbor, Bangladesh, I inserted Bangladesh intentionally here. Bangladesh has been performing pretty well because of primarily because of the development of the garment industry. Its share was only 5% in the 1960s, but it has been increasing, and then now the GDP share is more than 20%. So Bangladesh has performed pretty well, and what I'm worried about India, because India has not succeeded in the development of the manufacturing sector. So I'm really hoping that India will establish effective development strategies, particularly manufacturing sector, so that eventually India will become one of the. India is a big country and democratic country, and a lot of countries respect India. So I really wish that India is going to be one of the world leaders. But unless India succeeds in the development of manufacturing sector, that will not happen. That's my comments on the precious book. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Asuka, for thought-provoking views. So it is really like to think over certain points that you have highlighted. So now I would like to invite Dr. Rajiv to comment on some of the views or points that Professor Asuka has raised.
Yes. Thank you, Rachita, and thank you very much, Professor Otsuka. Thank you for those comments. And I assure you that the strategies will follow maybe in a next volume, because you can't put everything together. And we are at the moment, actually, I am at the moment writing in the midst of a book called The Modi Decade, and which will review the performance in much greater detail about India. And hopefully there we might be able to talk about the strategies that you so eloquently advocated. Believe you me, we could have put some of it here, but then the book would have been unreadable, and the publisher didn't want any of that. So there is a space constraint. So that is why we kept to the goals and not to the strategies, because the thought is, Professor Otsuka, that our goals have to be now different in the coming decades than what they were in the past. And that is the whole idea, that the goals have to be different. And therefore, as you said yourself, you didn't agree with natural farming, but the goal has to be carbon removal, no more adaptation and mitigation. So for that, you have to think completely differently. That's the thought. The idea is to provoke the thought that you have to think differently and set yourself different goals as you go forward. So which is why the emphasis on the goals. The second one, so many, thank you for spending the time and giving such rich comments. I mean, I must once more thank you for spending the time. On, for example, the HDI in OECD level HDIs and the strategy. Amazingly, one state in in India called Kerala, Kerala has achieved OECD levels human development indicators, but at per capita income, which are, I think, about a third or something like that of the OECD levels, about 6,000 or so. So there is a known strategy here. We can do that, and which is why it lead to our recommendation of a different kind of public-private partnership, because that is, and governance transformation. Because and you see, these are like sort of, these are like bullets. I mean, because governance transformation is allowed, and so how do we do it? So absolutely right. We need to go into those depth, but we thought that we will at least flag the requirement. So that's one comment on what you said. The lack of econometrics. One, I am not an econometrician. Two, my co-author is a historian. So therefore econometrics. And three, actually more importantly, we wanted this book for the layman. We didn't, the target audience was not my peer economists, but the layman, with the lay, the sort of, so this is why we kept it as simple as that. Your suggestion of having a concluding paragraph which summarizes the argument in each chapter, well taken. If there is a second edition, we will try and do that. Let me come to the manufacturing part that you so emphasize. India has declared its target of manufacturing as 25% of GDP, I think 20 years ago, something like that. And you're still, as you were rightly saying, that we are 15%, etc. Now in the new world, the fragmented trade, the fragmented global economy, the world trade growing slower than GDP growth, global GDP growth for the first time. The share of trade in global GDP has declined. So therefore, even countries like Bangladesh will find it difficult to ramp up their manufacturing capacity. In India, for and it's we have tried this. We have tried many industrial policies. There is a thing called production linked incentive scheme, etc. And so on. But I think we will have to depend much more on services, like health and education, and making it a global hub, and tourism, and to generate the kind of employment that for manufacturing to absorb the surplus labor in Indian agriculture. And by the way, the Indian agriculture has huge amounts of surplus labor. 43% of our workforce produces only 18% of our GDP. So there is massive low productivity there. But for the manufacturing sector, given what's happening in the world economy, and given the excess capacities that China has developed to dominate, I think 37% of global manufacturing today, and excess capacities in sectors after sectors, it will not be easy for India. And even if we do, we'll have to adopt very capital intensive technologies which will not degenerate the employment that we did. So the Lewis model is actually dead. The whole notion of surplus agriculture labor movement from agriculture to manufacturing and then to services, I think is gone. So we'll have to find different ways of doing it. And so that's why we didn't emphasize so much on manufacturing, but we focused on employment as the key. So wherever you can generate the employment, that is what you should do. Lastly, finally, I might come to your pessimism about China, which is opposed to my optimism about China. So you say that China's per capita income is twice that of India. My estimates are that they are 5 times that of India in nominal. We are $3,000 per capita, and they are $15,000 per capita. In PPP terms, they are double, or slightly more than double, right? But at the same time, the fact is that yes, the Chinese also did what the East Asian tigers did. 3 decades from 1990 to 2020, they grew at 10% per annum. And that is that's a fact. And we from 1990, by the way, Professor, in 1990, the Chinese per capita income were little lower than that of India. $371 for India and $326 for China. But today, as I said, in nominal terms, they are 5 times because they grew at 10% those 3 decades, and then after that at 5 and 6, and India grew at 6.4% on average. So you say that India grew fast. My argument in the book is that India didn't grow fast enough. The 6% is okay, but 6% will get us, and we talk about this, will land us right in the middle of the middle income trap that Latin Americans have suffered. And they will not break out of it, as China is now trying, and as Korea, Taiwan, and Japan successfully did, to break out of the middle income trap and go into the higher income bracket. For that, India has to grow at 8% minimum to reach $14,000 per capita, which is the World Bank definition of high income economy. And so therefore, on your Chinese pessimism and on your Indian optimism, let's agree to have different views at this point of time. Yeah, but nonetheless, thank you all. Thank you very much for those very, very thoughtful, substantial comments that you've done. Please, I'm requesting you and Rachita to send me your slides, because then I'll like to respond to you in greater detail in writing, perhaps going forward. But thanks again, and I hope some of my observations to your points, to your discussion, did resonate with you to a certain extent. Just one last thing, which is that I have to talk about gross welfare product. My thought was that Kuznets' idea of GDP is very old, and because it doesn't take into consideration the decline of natural capital, and it just has nothing. Neither does it have any notion of equity within the country. It's an aggregate number. Nor does it include the women's, contribution to the value, to the growth of value, to value addition in a country. And finally, it doesn't take into consideration what is happening at the bottom of the pyramid. So what I don't want for India is a society like America, which has the highest, incomes in the world, but then also has a very large number of homeless people, and people whom I've seen, suffering. So that is why the gross welfare product idea was suggested. It follows a similar logic as Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen, who did the project for President Macron about talking about the gross happiness index and so on. So but critically for me, the not using the decline in natural capital is a major weakness of the GDP. And this brings, sorry Rachita, but just brings me to the problem of the free rider. Rather than I'm well aware of it, but rather than that, we suggested it in a positive manner to form the coalition of the willing, which is that if all the countries can come together and converge on an agreement of what to do with emissions and world climate, etc., then each one of the countries may recognize their own duty toward the global public good, which otherwise at the moment nobody is doing, and especially our expectation that advanced economies will provide the financing and the way forward, I think is misplaced, as COP30 has proved again. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. So it is really a great opportunity to have you with us. So actually, I would like to now give a chance to our participants and who has joined us online, and our fellows and colleagues who are waiting to interact with you. So we have a couple of questions and to take forward the discussion. So I would like to invite Dr. Nawang, if you can ask the question directly, so that would be good. So, Dr. Nawang?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. Just realized now. Yeah, my question is very simple. After listening to your talk, one thought that came to me is like right now in especially South Asia, and also situation is quite similar elsewhere. So there are lots of geopolitical tensions, such as India-China tension, India-Pakistan tension in South Asia. So is it correct for us to interpret this as a transition mismanagement for the regional cooperation, which could otherwise have provided lots of public goods. I would like to know your opinion on thought on this.
So, thank you, Nawang. You're essentially saying that regional cooperation could have provided a number of public goods to address these transitions. I completely agree with you. I used to call myself a 𝐷. I had actually started a journal by that name called 𝐷, and I was, I was very keen on developing this. I'd done a lot of work. I was in the ADB in charge of regional cooperation in South Asia. So so I was holding that view, but unfortunately for political, geopolitical reasons, etc., that regional cooperation has not come about in South Asia. And therefore, and so that's something that we need to work on. And for me, South Asia exists from Kabul to Yangon, and from Srinagar to Sri Lanka to Colombo. So that's the area that we need to cover and work on. It's not going to be easy, but my response to Professor Otsuka, I tried and I developed some strategies on practical grounds, but I didn't succeed, let me put it like that. But at the moment, one of the suggestions that is being made in the book here is that we need to do this at least with India and China, our northern neighbor, because of what's happening in China and also what might be the high costs if we don't, if we don't make that if we don't make that relationship better as we go forward. So therefore, South Asia, and then with China, and then, as I've said in my talk, and I've actually worked on it also, India Pacific is where we should be working on for this. Now, the bottom line here is that in India, we don't, my view is at least, and I hope I'm wrong, that we in India don't take India Pacific as seriously as we should. And therefore, we don't do the kind of work that we require to create the relationships. But hopefully that will change.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. So, Dean Bambang, may I invite you?
Yeah, thank you, Rachita. And thank you, Dr. Rajiv, for very interesting presentation from the book. And since we were both kind of former national development planning person, so I like really to know about your, the India vision of 2047, which I believe, India has aspiration to be high income country by that time, which is 100 years of the independence. So if we look at the East Asian miracle in 1990s, it's quite clear. I mean, the driver, the growth driver behind that is manufacturing, export promotion, so all basic kind of, macroeconomic strategy. And you rightly mentioned that these days that might not work, especially for India. I mean, if you are trying to copy what East Asian Miracle has been doing in 1990s, and you mentioned also about the role of services sector. But in general, I really like to know, as a former Niti Aayog, what will be like the grand design of India in order to achieve the 2047? Because I believe India now still at the lower middle income in terms of per capita. And if you like to be a high income country by 2047, meaning that you only have basically 22 years, to have relatively high economic growth continuously for the rest of the 20 years. And then related to Ngawang question before, when you responded that India so far hasn't given kind of priority more to the Indo-Pacific approach. Is it related to the position of India not being a member of RCEP? Because in my opinion, if Asia want to be more integrated, at least trying to copy what EU has been doing, I think RCEP could be one of the kind of the solution, because RCEP trying to get all the the big Asian economies in one trade agreement. And of course, we hope that we don't have we don't have to depend too much to US, to Europe, but rather we are trying to strengthen ourselves by building the supply chain within our region. So I like to know maybe your opinion about RCEP, and of course the first about what will be the grand strategy to achieve the India 2047. Thank you, Dr. Kumar.
Thank you, Dean Bambang. Thank you very much. The grand strategy for India. So the first, if you do the numbers and so on, it's very clear that India has to raise its growth rate from about average of 6.4% to 8% plus to reach from $3,000 per capita to $14,000 per capita. Now, in PPP terms, it becomes much easier because in PPP terms, you're about $12,000 now, three times, the nominal. And so from there, if you have to reach PPP terms, the high income status, that's just a song. You can grow at whatever level. But that's, in my view, that's not good enough because PPP, yes, is all right, but at the same time, it doesn't give you the comprehensive national power. It doesn't also give you the kind of welfare level that you want, living standard that you want for your people. So to raise it from 6 to 8%, the 2% extra that we want, let's say minimum, for me, I think the grand design one is to transform our agriculture. It is the most backward sector in our economy by far. As I said earlier, 43% of our workforce producing at best 18% of our GDP, not acceptable, cannot do. But that's easier said than done because our agriculture is hugely fragmented. 84% of our land holdings are less than 1 hectare. And as I said, our return on chemical fertilizer has declined from 12 kilograms per kg in 1980 to now less than 5 kilograms, and our water level and our cropping pattern is distorted. So we have to put a huge effort on agricultural transformation, increasing the share of agro processing, which is only 10%, and that can emerge, Dean, as one of our exporting sectors, because we have 15 agroclimatic zones, but nobody thinks about that in a very sustained manner, and that is, I think, what is required to be done. Everybody gets involved in manufacturing all the time. Agro processing is also manufacturing, but we don't think about that in those terms. Now, I know, for example, 2 companies which are exporting potato powder, dehydrated potato powder to Japan. That's pretty high technology and also high agricultural productivity. So that's the first part of my grand design. The second part I would say now is that you have to improve your earnings in the services sector, not just ITES, not just software, which Professor Otsuka referred to, but we are trying. We can grow as the education and medical hub for Africa, for South Asia, for West Asia, and there's a large amount of evidence that this is happening, but not in an organized manner enough, because the government is not beginning to give that policy support to this. Plus tourism. India's tourist potential is hugely underexploited, underworked. The Prime Minister has repeatedly talked about setting up different circuits, this, that, and the other. But if you look at I think our total foreign tourist visitors are, 11 million. Paris gets about 70, and Beijing gets about, 60 or something like that. And our whole country gets about, we take solace in our domestic tourism rising, but that doesn't generate the kind of additionality that you want to do. So that's my second answer. So broadening the services scope of the services sector. That's the second. The third one is, of course, increasing our share in global manufacturing exports. In merchandise exports, it's been stuck at 1.67% for decades now. our services share has gone up to about, I think, 3.5 or something like that. China's is higher even there. But there, what you have to do is to make a very conscious and very focused choice for selecting the sectors, and then go whole hog into supporting them and getting them to at the moment our exports are highly diffused, and sort of fragmented. The others, the category of others in our exports, maybe I estimate something like 28-29%. The other part of our manufacturing exports is that for the last almost decade or so, a much larger growth of capital intensive petroleum exports and chemical exports, which don't generate employment, and a weakness of our labor intensive exports. We have lost out to Bangladesh in garments, and that is where, and if you ask any garment exporter from India, they say that they have moved to Bangladesh because the ease of doing business for exports is not there in this country. Now, therefore, we talk about the new form of PPP. It's an actually practical suggestion, that the government should become a supporter, a promotional state rather than a regulatory state. But the other thing is, and this is what we are doing in Pele India, and actually we can do a lot more work, is that India, you cannot have a same export strategy for the whole of Europe. So therefore, you can't have the same one export strategy for the whole of India. Doesn't make sense. Every state in this country has its own comparative and competitive advantage. But we follow the old model all the time, because we think about the East Asian tigers, or if each one of them had a strategy, we should also have a strategy. No. So therefore, we just designed a strategy for UP, Uttar Pradesh, which is 250 million people, and is double landlocked. So its exports will be completely different from what that would be of Tamil Nadu. And why am I saying all of that? Plus, you have to get the anchor investors into the country. The fear of the foreigner that India has had forever and ever. 700 Japanese companies working in India compared to, Professor Otsuka would know better, maybe 50, 60,000 in China. Despite the belligerent relationship between the two, and only 700 in India, is that because we don't. So if we get anchor investors, which give us the market, technology, and capital access, if we formulate the state-specific, export strategies for different states, if we decide, to focus sharply on where our competitive, and if we include agro-processing and the government gives it its support, I think those three that will surely increase our share in merchandise trade. Now that would, so I've therefore outlined to you agricultural transformation, broadening the scope of the services sector, and rethinking our export strategy. So those are the three. If we do that, we can grow from 6 to more than 8. And the second question that you asked for was RCEP. I was very heavily involved because I was in Center for Policy Research. I was an academic at that time. And I think in RCEP or Asia Pacific, the sequence will be improvement in India-China relations and then RCEP or India-Pacific. It cannot be the other way around. Unless, and we should be clear about that. And if we continue with the sort of relationship that we have in India, between India and China, I think that degree of mistrust will not put us in any formation in which we are there together. And therefore, but again, as Professor Otsuka would say, yes, we should do that, but how to do it? But that's a great question, and that's a great question that we need to think through, because otherwise the vested interests in both countries only talk about mistrust and cannot happen, etc., etc. So we have to think afresh and we have to think differently. And so all my thought is about how to create a new paradigm of these questions rather than follow the old model. It's not enough to say increase manufacturing. No, not at all, because manufacturing it's completely changed today. It's different, And do you include handicrafts in manufacturing? All those questions must be asked at this point. We have this production-linked incentive scheme, which started in NITI Aayog. We selected 11 sectors. Now they've grown to 14. That we will give them the incentive to become globally competitive, and not happening because you don't invite the anchor investors. Only in one sector have we increased because we, at the time when I was in NITI Aayog, succeeded in inviting Apple, to India, and the electronic sector has boomed as a result, but not others. You have to ask the question why.
Okay, thank you.
Rachita, can I say a few words?
Yes, Professor Rastogi.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to hear that Rajiv will prepare the next book, which may talk about strategy. Dean Bamban, I want to tell you that for the last 40 years, development economists never talked about strategy. They analyze, the impacts of education, etc., but not the big picture, what we should do. If ADBI wants to take a leadership in establishing a strategy, I'm really willing to join in that effort. And that is actually missing. And I'm one of the very few who thinks about the strategy. This book published last year, the subtitle, Effective Development Strategies for Agriculture and Industry. I'm one of the very, very few who think about strategy. I'm very happy if I can talk about strategy in coming years with you and other colleagues in ADBI. Thank you.
Thank you, Asuka Sensei.
So, Dr. Sitaram has a very interesting question about related to our flagship study that Dean Bambang has initiated at ADBI. So, would you like to ask question directly?
Yeah. I first of all want to thank Dr. Rajiv Kumar because he and I also had a personal relationship and worked together at ADB. But more importantly, more recently, he was chair of the committee that is in charge to implement the first high-speed rail project in India with the support of Japan. So I want to preface my question with some fun statistics, although all are eminent economists. I found that in the last 50 years, every country that eventually became a rich country or developed country did host Olympics or major sports event that country hosted. And in that same year, they also inaugurated the high-speed rail in that country. So India is going very well in the direction. We just heard that 2030, India, Ahmedabad will host the Commonwealth Games. We are hoping the high-speed rail will run in that country. So the question to you is, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, if you are now like how Dean Bambang has shaped our flagship project, what are the must-do tasks that you think these large countries like India, Indonesia should do to really move towards the middle income to upper income trajectory? And how ADB, multilateral institutions, and philanthropies can contribute to that? And what should they do? What would you suggest?
Well, thanks a ton, Sitaram. Glad to see you here. India is bidding for the 2036 Olympics, and the high-speed train will run from Ahmedabad to Mumbai in 2029. And I was the Prime Minister's envoy, for the starting of it. 2027, it'll have a shorter run, which in Gujarat. So I think those are propitious signs that we can do this. By the way, just as an aside, I think it's high time that we did away with the Commonwealth Games, because this vestige of the British Empire called the Commonwealth, I think it's, but nonetheless, we are doing it in 2030. On what ADBI can do, but quite honestly, maybe a bit immodestly, is that ADBI can, as I said, be the leader in this intellectual churning of how different new strategies are required in the current context for emerging economies, for the Asian emerging economies, to reach that, to make the transition from the low income to the high income country. They will not, certainly cannot follow the same path as was done by the Asian tigers. And by the way, they are the only countries which breach the middle income trap. Argentina, Brazil, Peru, they didn't. They are caught well and truly in the $14,000, $10,000, $11,000, and not. Argentina was the largest manufacturing country in the 1920s, but gone. So ADBI can be the key to bringing the Asian scholars together, academicians together, for thinking afresh on every sector that we have talked about. And I pointed out the three to you, which is the agriculture, and the scope of the services, as well as manufacturing, export-oriented manufacturing. In the current world, of course, we still need that external demand to be able to raise our domestic per capita income. That's a must, because our own being a consumption-dominated economy like India or maybe like Indonesia, 60%, 65% GDP coming out of domestic consumption will not help us get the scale that we require for being globally competitive and for expanding. So I think my sort of very specific suggestions for the ADB would be: one, to look at agricultural transformation; two, how to use AI for improving the human development indicators in education and health. Universal access to high quality education and health is a necessary condition for improving your per capita income. So that's the second one. Third, we can talk about how to remove the trade-off between growth and ecology. Because that trade-off, we can't, as I said, I've repeatedly, we can't grow today and retrofit tomorrow. That's gone. So what is it? How do we evolve a new strategy, which will help us? These three will be enough for the while, because they're quite big, and then we can take it from there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv. So before we wrap up with the session, so I would like to take only the last question from Dr. Dil Rahut.
Hi, Dil. Can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, we cannot hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv. I think you made a very wonderful presentation, and it aligns with what Dean Bamang has initiated at ADBI, overcoming middle income trap in India or in Asia. And I always call 𝐵𝐸𝐺𝑥it Asia. So that's the kind of initiative that Dean Bamang has initiated, and actually it resonates with the book that you have. My comment is that as India is growing fast, and Professor Otsuka has very positive opinion on the growth of India, that it can grow and it can really make it. So my thinking is that India, as it grows, it should also take its neighbors along with it, like India could take Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka in the process of 𝐵𝐸𝐺𝑖t South Asia rather than 𝐵𝐸𝐺𝑖t India. That's one point that I would like to hear from you. What is your view? And second one is that I'm an agriculture economist, have been working closely with Professor Otsuka, and I really have been echoing the agro-processing, transforming agriculture sectors to achieve growth. So that's something that I really like. My question is that you talked about two very important things. One is the AI, the other one is the climate change. Climate change is one of the biggest threat, existential threat to the humanity, but AI is also very short-term, near-term threat, as you have been hearing, not only about job displacement, also about disorientations, misinformations. And AI has been the worry that AI has been creating is humongous. Every morning when I get up, I always think, how would AI transform, adversely our world in next decade? So what would you like us to handle, AI or climate? I can wait for 100 years for climate change to affect me, but AI will eat me up maybe in next 5 or 10 years. So I really want to hear your views on that.
Thank you, Dil. Wonderful to hear from you, and thanks for being here. Let me answer the first one first, which is on taking the neighbors along. There, the big thing is that we will be able to do that if we become their equals and not act as big brother. And that doesn't come easy for us. But you have to suggest means and ways for us, to become partners in development. And maybe we should devise and design some programs, joint programs, where India and all its neighbors can participate as equal partners. And and there are several that we can think about. So that's my first thought, which is that let's not think about India taking its neighbors along. Let's think about the region coming together to go along, because there are many issues which can be only solved through regional cooperation. Whether it is environment or water or trafficking, it's all of us have to do it together. That's the first thought. On your thought about which one first, quite clearly you are concerned with AI much more than with climate change. By the way, it's not going to be 100 years. It's going to be less than 20. Yeah, that the climate will affect you in a very major way, in a very major way, especially, in the South Asian region with the Asian brown cloud that I was talking about. So therefore that threat is as imminent as anything else. So therefore both have to be done together. And for me, the AI is at least in India, because we are doing this from our, many people in Bangalore and Hyderabad and so on, they're actually now harnessing AI, for the usefulness of our people. For example, give you one example, we have this program called Diksha. Now, Diksha uses AI to make available all materials anywhere in the world to our people in their mother tongue. 22 of them, 23 of them, automatically. You just have to click on and you can read them. So that's already done. For example, AI, as I said to you, is being now used for our digital public infrastructure, to improving that. So here we have taken it seriously, and people like Nandan Nilekani and Prabhat Verma and others, they will tell you that we will not develop general language models, but we will harness those models to our own use. But again here, as I said, it is the critical time for India and Japan to come together, because the two together will have the same level of data and the same level of intelligence, to balance both China and the US in their effort to develop AI for the common good. So that and employment, as I said, the way to do it will be to focus on generating employment wherever that is possible. I mean, there are some jobs which will go, we know that, but we need to think more carefully about where new jobs will come and where we can generate them. So that's the way to tackle AI, the two ways to tackle AI. On climate, my pain, my problem is that we are not taking it seriously enough, at least in South Asia. We just don't. We think that we have to do our development first, and then we'll take care of the climate later. I hope I don't think I'm wrong that we have to do this simultaneously, because we don't have that choice. And that, please remember that will, removing just that one trade-off will require a very different way of thinking about our development going forward. How do you do urbanization? 450 million people waiting in India to be urbanized. If you don't do green urbanization now, which has all its implications which are known, you're gone, you're finished, right? But nobody talks about that. Similarly, for agriculture, as I said, or energy transition, and so on. Now, we have a green hydrogen mission in India. It has to get off the ground and start producing green hydrogen through using solar channel, and then energy transition could be held, done the way it should be. Otherwise, for India to grow from energy consumption of per capita 1,500 kilowatt hours to the world average of 3,500 to the US average of 27,000 will mean there is no planet left for us to live in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv. So now I would like to invite Dean Bambang to share some closing thoughts and join us to thank Dr. Rajiv for sharing such an interesting views on the global transitions.
Yeah. So, Dr. Rajiv, again, on behalf of ADBI, I would like to thank for your, very interesting and also very dynamic presentation about basically about the global situation that might affect the India in the future. And certainly because we in ADBI are starting our flagship study on trying to shape the prosperity of Asia with quality growth, in which we would like to see more and more Asian countries getting out of middle income trap, then part of your presentation, I think, very useful for us, and especially when both you and Professor Otsuka mentioned about the needs of development strategy. In fact, that's exactly what we are going to do with this flagship study. So rather than just analyzing the weakness or analyzing the kind of limitation of every Asian economies, we hope that we can find or we can say contribute on development strategies for especially the middle income Asia in order to avoid middle income trap and becoming like the role model in this global situation. And I think you know very well, Eastern European now has produced the majority of the new high income economy. And I think they have been able to do that partly because also regional integration. I mean, the role of EU is very critical. So that's why I think we need to combine the development strategy both internally as well as development strategy by trying to link our economies with other economies, especially in the region. So again, thank you very much. And with this, we can conclude this webinar by Dr. Rajiv Kumar.
Thank you so much, Dean Bambang and Professor Asuka and Dr. Rajiv. So I would like to take just 1 minute of all of you to take a group photo. So to keep it as a memory for us getting together today. So please switch on your camera.
Please switch on my camera.
You are already. Yeah. So I'm asking like other panelists to join.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So with the one.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Yeah, maybe one more. Please smile. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining
Thank
us
you,
for this
everybody.
session today.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Rajiv. Thank you, Asuka Sensei.
Thank you. Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.